Good afternoon and welcome to our series of MIP Alumni Panel Discussions, where we gather former football internationals, now leaders in the industry across various roles, to discuss the major topics impacting the football industry. Our panel have all been on the UEFA MIP course. Today, I'm joined by former England, Chelsea and Juventus forward, Aluko. Having represented the line over 100 times, Eni is Aston Villa's first ever sporting director for women's football. Villa were also recently awarded the FA Women's Championship title. So much congratulations are in order for that, Eni. Romann is the co-founder and previous member of the new Israeli Football Players Organization and Hapoel Tel Aviv assistant manager. We're looking forward to hearing about your perspectives on race and diversity in the game. Finally, we have former Guyana manager Michael Johnson, who is now part of the England under-21 coaching setup. Michael also acts as an ambassador at Derby County and is also making waves as a board member of the Sports People's think tank. I want to thank you all for joining me today. And it seemed that there's only one place really to start. Following the global demonstrations that have dominated headlines and conversation, this special episode is centered on the Black Lives Matter movement and football's response to tackling an international human rights issue. In the wake of the death of George Floyd, football and politics have really crossed paths in recent weeks, with high-profile players, leagues, clubs, broadcasters and sponsors coming out with a show of support for the message Black Lives Matter. To get this discussion going, I'll start by asking, what's your general assessment of how the football industry has responded in these past weeks to the protests and demonstrators desperately calling for an end to police violence and systemic racism? I'll start with you, Eni. What's your feeling on how the industry has reacted to the current protests?
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for the nice, warm introduction, as always. I think that the reaction has been incredible, to be honest, around the world. I think George Floyd's unfortunate death has really sparked the conversations, the internal change in people's hearts and minds, but also the external changes that we've seen through protests, through social media, through so many different platforms of conversation, uncomfortable conversations, real home truths being told, people really changing their mindset, which is probably the most difficult thing to change in life is your mindset. So I think it's been hugely positive. Out of such a tragic death, so many positive things have happened that mean that we are able to address what we need to do to get better. I think that the other step to that is actually the action. You can talk and talk and talk, but unless you can match it with action, it doesn't really mean anything. So, whether it's legislative change in America, where we've seen, rules coming in around police brutality, whether it's, policy changes in politics, whether it's money being redistributed into communities, Black communities in particular, in America and in the UK. These are all action steps that have been taken off the back of George Floyd's unfortunate death. Have we got a long way to go? Yes, we do, because we're trying to change a status quo that has been established for hundreds of years. So it doesn't change overnight, but it's certainly been an amazing sea change that we've seen over the past month that I can only hope continues to happen.
Thank you, Eni. Dan, your comments on the response to the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes, I think obviously we are experiencing something very, very interesting. I think it's very important and it's very nice to see that athletes are expressing their solidarity to other athletes first and foremost. And I think this is something quite new, because even if we go back 4 years ago to the acts of Copernic, the reaction was not as united as now. And I think that in general, the question of athletes being expressing their thoughts about politics is a very interesting question, and a big question, and a complex question. But I think it's very important that athletes will express their care and for their communities, obviously, and try to to recruit their social position to create social change. But again, it's very complex and interesting, and I bet that we will get there during our conversation. Yeah, so this is the introduction, I guess.
Thanks, Dan. Michael?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to come and share. What I would say, I'd say similar to any, that I think as the countries have all reacted and witnessed the scenes that we've seen across the pond in the States, and I think it's been wonderful to hear the messaging from so many different nations, peoples from different nations, a real collected voice that, it's not going to be tolerated. And the game itself, the question you asked was about the game itself. And I think at this present moment in time, the game's got a long way to go. I see significant changes in time. What we see is a lot of noise. There's a lot of, obviously, emotions. There's a lot of, pictures and banners of Black Lives Matter and badges, which is great to see. But what we really want is the change that we all want to see upstairs in boardrooms, in leadership positions, in management positions, and also financing of the game as well, making sure that the finances of the game are shared equally. Opportunities are there for everybody, not just people from a white background. Let's be diverse right across the board. Let's really pump finance into the game and let it be shared by everyone. This is a beautiful game that we've all enjoyed, that we've all participated in. And I think it's now time that, communities need to benefit from this. As Annie's quite rightly mentioned, that the finance needs to go into the communities as well, particularly the Black communities that have been so deprived of opportunities themselves. So for me, there's a real long way to go, but the very fact that we're having these conversations is huge.
Jono, you don't mind me calling you Jono?
No. Cool.
Okay, good. You mentioned, but I didn't want us to start going down the routes of nicknames, because I'm not sure you have my back. But you mentioned some of the symbolic gestures there, which are, of course, important. We've seen kneeling before games. We've seen lots of positioning of the slogan Black Lives Matter. Do you think the game is ready to go further and implement some of that structural change that you've mentioned? And what are some of your thoughts around the mechanisms that can really move the dial on these issues?
Well, if we look at history, and that's all we can go off, history shows us that the game's not really ready to embrace the systematic change that we all wish and hope for. When I look across other industries, I see, health sector, education sector, so many sectors, so many governing bodies, so many football clubs. So for me, there has to be something quite unique here. And I'll go back to Annie's point. Is it legislation? Is it finance pumped into, and that's what I meant by finance. Is it finance pumped into some organization or some, I don't know, but there has to be some kind of some legitimate thoughts and processes given to this matter, because we've been down this road far too many times. And quite frankly, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, I don't want to go back to, the last 5-10 years and scratch your head thinking that, we should have done this or we should have done that. For me, this is a time now, and it's really come about because of the unfortunate death of George Floyd. And let's get that out there. It's tragic to see. But the uproar, the swell of emotion, the real belief now from not just black but white youth, the real voices, what I'm hearing is that it's time for change. And I think we want change now. It's gone past the point now of commissions, of reports, of which change. We want change.
Thank you, Michael. Dan, I think that it would be great to get your insight on your thoughts on the symbolic gestures that we've seen thus far and what can be done to affect structural change. I think Michael has alluded to the fact that there's lots of allies across the board, white, gender, across sexuality, who understand that this issue being focused on the Black Lives Matter symbol and agenda. What's your thoughts on what can be done over and above these symbolic gestures?
This is a great question, Jason. I think, first of all, I like the fact that there are gestures that you can do that are non-violent, but can still make a change. So I think this is a positive way of politics. But I have to say that I think it's only a first step, and for me it's not a significant step, because I think the message is really catchy, and we are opposing violence. Everyone will agree with it, obviously, and even Republicans, at least some of them, will agree with this, and it's very easy to be part of the trend and to post on Instagram and support it. And I'm not trying to say it's not important, but it's only a first step. I think that the test, like Michael said, it's about finance and it's about money, and I think that police violence is just a symptom. It's not the problem itself. Like, obviously it's a big problem, but I think it's a question of the center of powers, and a lot of sections of populations have been deprived of this power, and now the conversation has changed, and symbolically it looks good. And as I said, solidarity is very, very important, and it's an essential step to create a change. But it's about money, and it's about distributing the money differently, and to give it to communities who didn't have this money. So for me, it's all about this, and yeah, and this is where true politics should act.
We discussed symbolic gestures versus structural change, and I know that you recently appeared at the DCMS committee hearing and you called for targets and intentional change. Can you expound a little bit on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think targets mean that people are accountable to change. I think often when you try and self-regulate or put in voluntary measures, ultimately I think that means that people just directors, owners fall into their comfort zones of their sort of usual networks. I think when you put in sort of more mandatory policies, when you put in targets, there becomes a recruitment behavior. There becomes behavior that moves towards that target. Much like and I always like to use other examples, because often in football, we think we've got to reinvent the wheel, but we don't. We can just draw from the examples we already have. So the homegrown player rule, for example, was something that came in very recently. It changed recruitment behavior around young players. Agents started to take on more young players. There was higher investment in academies. Obviously, more young players were coming through into the first team because they had to, because it was mandatory. In the same way, financial fair play, owners can't just spend money how they wish anymore. They're regulated. In the same way, I think that, you know, where it comes to greater representation in football, you know, race representation in football, in management and executives, there needs to be more mandatory targets so that it's not something that people pick and choose. It's something that ultimately is, it just changes the behavior so that in 10 years' time, 5-10 years' time, we're not going to be talking about it because it's become normalized, because it's become something that everybody's worked towards. I think that's where, you know, I think it's really important for things to be more mandatory on the mandatory side than on the voluntary side.
This is something, a point that really resonates with me, because I think the time and the urgency of the matter in light of what's going on globally really speaks to policy changes. And I think, to Eni's point, we have seen voluntary programs put in place. I think of the EFL Rooney Rule, in inverted commas, a voluntary code, which is about getting coaches and managers in front of lead decision makers, which, due to its voluntary nature, hasn't had the change which everybody would have hoped for. I think when you look at the homegrown player rule, when you look at financial fair play, these are policy shifts put in place to ensure a behavior. And I think that we are at the point in the discussion where it is about that and not about voluntary or addressing the lack of pipeline of whether that be coaches, managers, or administrators, but it's actually about policy changes, working with the stakeholders to make real change. I think that's clear in the feeling and the discussion of people currently, to your point, Eni.
And Jason, just to add to that as well, I think when we look at the example we've currently got, Nuno Espirito Santo, I mean, I think people say he's black. I'm not sure his particular ethnicity. We know he's obviously Portuguese, but he's not white. He's not English. I think when we look at somebody like him, who is a success story, we have to also look at how he got there. And he's an example of an agent bringing in, you know, lots of players and him into the club and then becoming a successful coach. In the same way, I think when we start to move towards an actual policy change for, you know, more black managers, more black executives, you're going to see agents trying to actually bring their own talents and clients into the clubs they're already in. So it's also how it works in the ecosystem.
Thanks, Eni. Michael, would you like to contribute?
I'd like to add to that. You know, this is not just a call because we shoehorning in any person of ethnicity into positions. You know, if you want to look at the global game, how players from all races and cultures have contributed to a real global game that's made it the product it is, you don't need to look any further than the Premier League. If you want to look at the music industry and how we've contributed to fantastic music and business, so the product in itself will be much better by diversity in leadership positions. That will help a club financially, will also help break down the structural imbalances that we see in legislation, and will also help the players actually on the field, who could then look, and not just players, by the way, the community, who can then look and see somebody of ethnicity, like Eni is now at Aston Villa, and why can't a girl who's 9 years old, who's born in Answorth in Birmingham, look at Eni and say, I want to be that person. So there's so many contributing factors as to why this is not just about football. It's actually bigger than football. So for me, it's a real opportunity here to have some real strong conversations to try and move the dial.
Dan, policy about addressing some of the challenges in recruitment of coaches, managers, administrators, and having better diversity and representation across the game. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I have to agree with Annie and Michael. This is inspiring words, really. It's really about representation and allowing diversity, not only on the field but also off the field, within the circle of decision makers. And as long as we don't have it, situation will stay the same.
Dan, we're really keen to get a perspective and understanding beyond England on a lot of these issues. And that's why it's so good to have you on the call. What has your experience been of the support for Black Lives Matter in Israel?
I think that, Jason, you are pushing me against the wall, because everything in Israel is more complex, obviously. And I think it got the attention of most of the people here, and most of the people, at least the ones that are close to me, they are obviously they got shocked from this case of Floyd, and yeah, they really supported the athletes themselves. They didn't. I don't recall any acts of solidarity here, but yeah, but there was support, obviously, to this act, and it got the attention. And I think there are other issues here as well of discrimination and racism, and that are problems that we have and are not willing to address yet, unfortunately. And we still don't have the courage to face it, I guess. And I hope this case will light it somehow, and that people here will follow it as well in the world of sports.
Michael, some people question how big an issue that we have in sports. They see 30%, certainly in the English leagues, 30% of the players from a Black and ethnic minority background. A huge proportion of those actually being Black, I would say closer to 29%. What would you say is the scope and the scale of the problem that we have with systemic racism and discrimination in our sport?
Well, when you look at management level, you're talking 4.7% of the game is managed by people from ethnicity. When you're looking at senior leadership positions, we're talking under 2%. When you talk about us as a society, we represented 14, 15%, and around those figures, the game itself is 30%. So there's a wide gap between 1% and 30% are not even getting, 30% of players. But then that gap between the 30% and where are they? Why are they not getting opportunities? Are you trying to tell me that none of them want to go and further their careers in management, in board positions, in leadership positions? So there's definitely a problem there. And if we were to look at the governing bodies, the football clubs, and take a snapshot of the backroom staff, just like we'd take a snapshot at the start of every season of the start of a season football picture, then we'd probably see why a lot of people of colour are saying, well, what is the point?
Michael, I want to come back to you on this point, because you're one of the most educated coaches out there. I'll let you list off all of the courses that you participated in and passed. You've also managed at international level. I've heard some comments that, is it that not enough Black players expect to be part of administration, coaching, management? What do you say to that?
I say there's so many players that, and this is a twofold question. So number one, we have problems getting into those positions. But then number two, what happens is because there's no motivational figures up there, you kind of look and go, well, what's the point? This is where we're currently sat now with a lot of players who are transitioning out of the game. But what we do have successful candidates who have come through pro licenses. I know that the figures of a B license in around 450. I know the figures of the A license are in around 70 to 80 figures. And I know that the pro license itself, you're talking around 35 candidates who could go straight into jobs now. So my point is, where are they? That's one. Then we can go back to the on-board course, which is a course that you're accredited to go and sit on boards. And that's boards right across sport, not just football itself. There was a report what came out that showed the governing bodies of the boards. And I believe the positions were in and around the 100 mark, of which there was only one person of ethnicity in there. So there's courses out there that players of colour have taken, but still there's a glass ceiling. Still there's a lack of opportunities. So my question to the game would be, why would anybody in their right mind look and see what's going on and go and spend the necessary fees, go and take 2 years out of their life to go and get graduated and qualified and potentially be told that there's nothing there for you at the end of it?
How large is the challenge in your view that we face from systemic racism and discrimination within the game?
It's certainly, I think the measurement of how big it is will depend on statistics, won't it? I think, Michael then just, explained there the numbers. And I think the numbers in terms of certainly representation of leadership from Black and ethnic minorities is embarrassing. And I think the numbers often highlight how big the problem is. However, I think sometimes we do need to appreciate as well how far we've come. Once upon a time, there wasn't 30% of Black players on the field. You and I are from, different generations, even as footballers. Once upon a time, the likes of John Barnes, John Fashanu were the only ones in their team. Hopefully, in 10 years' time, we won't be having this conversation and it won't be a problem. Again, once upon a time, we didn't have women in media. 10 years ago, I remember we didn't have women talking on, Sky Sports News and Sky Sports and BT Sport and all of those platforms. Now, when you see, it's almost becoming normal. It's not, it's not a problem. But that took intentional change to do that. In the same way now, I think hopefully in 5 to 10 years' time, we're not looking at an embarrassing problem. We're looking at something where if you have 5 Black managers leading 5 teams in the Premier League, it's nothing. People don't bat an eyelid. So this is why we have to have these conversations now. We have to implement these changes now so that in 10 years' time, 5, 10 years' time, it's not even a conversation.
Yes, thanks for that, Eni. I'm definitely supportive of that. I feel that we are in a moment now, because I remember several years ago having the same discussions about what is the intentional change. And a lot of the conversations at that point were about voluntary codes, addressing the pipeline. The attitude seemed to be from the game that, yes, we have challenges. Yes, there are systemic challenges. We need you Black players to go away, work harder, get more qualifications so that we can ignore you even more. And that is what it seems the attitude has been like over several years, certainly since I've been involved with this call for change, is that the discussions haven't moved any further. Whilst we've seen more coaches and managers and administrators become more educated in a position to affect this change, unfortunately, it seems that the numbers haven't really moved.
Well, I think, Jason, this is where George Floyd's death really has sparked something that means that you just can't get away with not changing anything anymore. And whether that's, outside of football, to the biggest organizations in the world have been called out. So I hear what you're saying in terms of, we were having these conversations years ago and nothing's changed. But I think the sea change, what we're feeling now is that now there's a public accountability. Premier League are being asked, you need to release your numbers, much like PFA did, in terms of representation. And I think it's only going to take a matter of time before they have to do it. Because now we're going to see, you're seeing what's happening in the NFL with the Redskins. You're seeing sponsors saying, unless you do this, we're not going to put millions behind your organization. So I think that's where we've come. We've come to a different place where you're just not going to be able to get away with it anymore as an organization that does have systemic racism and with people that benefit from systemic racism. Because, we have an economy that is sponsored and paid for by many brands that just cannot affiliate themselves with racism. So that's where we, for us as people that lobby and for us as stakeholders in the game, we need to be smart and understand where the money usually is where the power is. And where the power is, that's where you can really influence and shape and say, well, hold on a second, do you want to be aligned to a league that doesn't have a black manager in sight and it's the most global league in the world?
Dan, what's your perception of the size of the challenge faced by these issues?
I think that if you are talking about systemic racism and discrimination, you have to talk about ideology as well. And I want to address the link. Michael talked about the link between representation and motivation. And I think that living in Western society, and especially capitalist Western society, we are all speaking about a certain lie, and we are all trying to believe in the lie that if you will work hard, you will be successful. And all of the people who are successful, they are saying, yeah, we worked hard and this is why we are successful. But it's not true, because the game is fixed. It's not an open competition. And this is why, and if you are coming from a minority and you look up and you don't see people of your kind being in decision-making positions, for example, yeah, you understand that the game is fixed and you don't have the motivation as well. So this is a circle. And I think that sports is a beautiful metaphor for that, because as former athletes, we can understand it perfectly. We can be competitive, and we are competitive as long as the competition is open. But the competition is not open, and we are all saying again and again that yeah, we just have to work hard, and whoever works hard is successful, and if you are not successful, it's because you didn't work hard. But it's all about opportunities and chances. And if you are for example, I will take it to Israel, if you are an Arab boy who has grown up in Hebron, for example, or East Jerusalem, no, you won't get the same opportunities I got as a Jewish boy growing up in Western Jerusalem, for example. And this is why I think the systematic racism and discrimination is, if you want to oppose it, you have to oppose this ideology and this idea of meritocracy, which is just untrue. You just have to look at the numbers and realize it. And this is why I go back and say this is all about the center of powers, and about money, and about budget, and about trying to make this competition honest and free,
And that's a really powerful point. And I think the core of what you raised is really about the opportunities that are provided. And not many people are blocked from the opportunity of actually participating in sport. So on the pitch, as ex-athletes, we can show how valuable we are, how good we are in a certain context. The challenge is in coaching, management, and administration, if you're not getting interviews, even after doing all of the necessary education requirements, it's very difficult to point to the reason as to why you're not getting a chance. But if you never had a chance to have an interview, and that is the defining factor that you're trying to address with the Rooney Rule, which is saying this is not about quotas. Actually, it's about getting the decision makers to hear, speak, and see potential applicants that they may or may not have seen in the past. So seeing a new coach, a new manager who might give you a new viewpoint on something, maybe he or she might not be ready now, but maybe there's another role in the future. Maybe the next time that you're going to hire the manager, that they somehow shifted your thinking. And these are the kind of policy changes which has been muted already and which seem to have some effect in the US.
Also, Jason, can I add something?
Yes, please.
It's just that, again, this individual discourse is so bad, because I really think it will be amazing if people who are successful won't refer to their hard work. Of course, they worked hard, but they will refer to the chances that allow them to succeed. And if I will be successful, I will always say, yeah, I was lucky enough. First of all, I was lucky enough. I was lucky enough to be born in the right place at the right time, to the right family. And yeah, I worked hard, but there are thousands who worked hard, you know, like me, but they didn't get the opportunity. So I just have to be grateful for being, you know, successful. And one of the best ideas I heard in our MIP course, again, we are always referring to this lecture of Jean-Claude Biver. And this guy is a very successful guy. But he said, and I really appreciate this point, he said, not like all the others who said how hard they worked and how they, you know, managed to pave through all the obstacles. No, he said, everything I achieved in life was because of other people, everything, and because I was lucky. And I think this is a much honest message with better impact. Like, yeah, okay.
I remember that talk, Dan. It made a huge impact on me as well. I just wanted to come to you, Jono, on the demonstrations that we've seen and the debate that is being had as a result of the Black Lives Matter demonstration. What positives can you think people can take from having their voices heard in a different way now? And what role can current players play beyond social media posts and speaking out publicly? What role can the players and athletes through athlete activism have in this moment?
I think what's been wonderful to see is a real collection of individuals coming together. And it's not been a black versus white, or it's not been, you know, age. It's been a mixture of individuals who have collectively voiced their opinion and said, no, it's enough. And I think the world is changing. I think, you know, when I look at the demographics of a lot of the, you know, the protests, and I went to one in Nottingham, when I arrived there, you know, it was a mixture of black and white, mixed heritage, youthfulness. So the dynamics of those that are running the game, who predominantly are, you know, your 60 plus white men who have been at the helm, it's no longer that way anymore. The world's changing. There's a lot more mixed heritage children. There's a lot more interaction with school friends. There's a lot more people in of different diversity in families, not just from a cultural aspect, maybe gender, disability. You could go on. So I think the youth now are collectively across the world saying no, because this is my friend, this is my family member, this is my husband, or I've got a mixed heritage, as opposed to what was the norm 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. So I think that's an interesting mix as well. I think as regards sorry, Jace.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as regard players, I think players are now empowered. It's no longer and it's moved from off the pitch, and he's right. It's now not so much about, you know, you being called the N word on the pitch, and there are little, obviously, moments of that which we still have to eradicate, but it's a different kind of subtle racism, or, you know, they want to say unconscious bias, which is preventing people from colour from getting into a leadership position, management positions. So I think the role of the player now is completely changed. And now with the global reach of some of these players, the voices which everybody wants to listen to and hear. We've seen recently how Marcus Rashford stood for something, and that now involved politics, that involved the government. So all of a sudden now the reach of players is so far, as opposed to what we had probably, you know, 20, 30 years ago, which then makes the impact of the athlete's voice so much more poignant. So I think there's so many different changing pieces to this as to why the enough is really going to, you know, be interesting over the next couple of months.
Thank you, Michael. If we just change gear a little bit and switch our attention to the NFL. Last week, their commissioner, Roger Goodell, said the NFL will encourage players to speak out and protest following the death of Floyd, and admitted that the NFL was wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier. The NFL also announced it will pledge over $250 million over the next 10 years to help fight systemic racism. This money will be allocated to a fund that will support the battle against the ongoing and historic injustices faced by African Americans. Is spending money on initiatives and programs like this a big part of the solution here, Eni?
It's a difficult one with the NFL because ultimately, as I said earlier, if your actions and your words don't match up, it's very, very difficult to see the understand the intention behind the money being spent at this level now to change. But on the flip side, you know, organizations do need to change, and you have to kind of embrace and welcome the change. So with NFL, it's a very tricky one because their track record has ultimately not shown them to be an organization that certainly support racial equality. But you know, I would say that I kind of applaud them for putting their necks out there, really, and saying, look, you know, we haven't always got it right. We'll certainly definitely not got it right. But at this point, are, you know, trying their best to make sure that they're investing in local communities. They are, you know, they're putting money behind, you know, programs in the community, working with the likes of Jay-Z. They're encouraging athletes to speak out, although I think the athletes would have spoken out anyway. We've seen how revered Colin Kaepernick is, and he's not even in the league. So I'm not sure whether them now endorsing what athletes are saying actually means anything, because I think the athletes would have said it anyway. But I think it just goes to show the pressure on these organizations now, like the NFL, to make sure they're on the right side of history, to make sure that they're putting their money where their mouth is, and really trying to measure and invest in change rather than just talking about it.
And with Eni's comments in mind, are you surprised that we haven't seen the Premier League or other big leagues or other stakeholders attach a real budget to highlight the value of their commitment? Or is this not so important because until the actions have been established? So are you surprised that we haven't seen this sort of budget allocation put in place with leagues, etc.? Or do you think it's more about action?
Oh, this is a big one. I think it's both. I think both, obviously, and I agree with every word Eni said. And I am very suspicious of the NFL because historically they were always on the wrong side of history. And if we are going back, I think they spend a lot of money and effort to deny the fact that head concussions are making a lot of damage to the health of their players. this is one episode that we have to remember, and I see a link between the two aspects, and what happened with Copernic as well. So I think they are now trying to make an effort, because, as Annie said, there is a lot of pressure, and because I believe that now it's became trendy, okay, and this is why they want to be part of the on the right side of the conversation. But again, it's about money, and it's about action, and it's about representation, and it's all together. But I'm always suspicious of these organizations, because it means someone has to give up on his power, on his money, and like actual people. And yeah, without pressure, it won't happen.
Michael, Dana just mentioned pressure there. What can be done to apply that pressure on authorities to tackle racism and social injustice?
Well, ideally, you would like them to, the authorities to look at the data that we all can see and say, look, as certain companies have said, look, the NFL have said it, they've apologized, and let's try and eradicate it. What we see is some companies have come out, like the companies that are committing large sums of money to fight diversity. And what we're seeing from the Premier League is 6 positions for the EFL, which is quite interesting in itself, that there've not been 6 positions in the Premier League. So ideally, for me, it is about the finance of the game. It is about them saying, look, this is what we should be contributing to fight racism in this area. But history tells us that that's not going to be the case. It's not the first time this has happened. Obviously, not on this magnitude, but there's been several times over the course of the years in my career, in our careers, no doubt before our careers, that the players, coaches have knocked on the governing body's doors and asked them for opportunities to try and help the situation. So it's going to be interesting over the coming weeks, months. But for me, it's, history tells me that it's something that I'm not expecting. So legislation, as Annie's already spoken about, is a way forward. And also a way to put pressure is potentially do what the MLS have done over, where there's been a group of players that have formed a coalition over there. So there's ways that the game could go, but it's going to be interesting now to see the response. Up to now, we've not seen anything, which is worrying, concerning, but let's see what happens.
Michael, how can our MIP network contribute in support of Black Lives Matter? What can be taken away from this panel discussion?
I think the MIP in itself, the UEFA badge in itself is a huge badge, the governing body of European football. Also, the participants of the course are all well known in their own countries at international levels themselves. And it's great as well, not for the likes of me and you just to be speaking out about this. I'm really appreciative of Dan giving up his time and speaking so articulately on these matters. But I think it's the voices of everybody. It can't just be a former black player who's looked upon and gone, oh, well, he's got a chip on his shoulder. Oh, it's because he wants this. No, this is a social injustice that has been going on for years, and we all know it's been going on for years. So let's all speak about it, because I think if you don't speak about it and you know about it, you're complicit in itself. So it's vitally important that the UEFA, MIP, the alumni really raise the consciousness of the game, of the governments, and of its global communities.
Again, I agree with every word. I think that our power is limited now, But first of all, I think that we have to be truly committed to the idea of diversity and to pursue the objection of opening all the boundaries and all the gates for everyone, even if it's saying that someone will not like us or will not feel comfortable with our opinions and values. And part of it is to be committed to educating the next generations and whoever wants to hear us about those values. So this is how I see our role in this field.
Let me agree with that, Dan. I think the power in the MIP is the network and the journey of each individual who's gone through the MIP course is about those who are educating themselves to be better, to give back to the game. And I think within that network, if we can educate ourselves on a variety of issues, including diversity, Black Lives Matter, and some of the racial systemic injustices and solutions that need to be put in place, I think it's a very powerful advocate for these themes and for these things. So I think that just having these discussions, sharing knowledge, being able to be part of discussing solutions where we are currently is an important vehicle for us to move forward, not only those who are watching this, but also those who are part of the MIP alumni. And I know that we could go on all day with this. I really want to thank you all for participating. But unfortunately, this is all that we have time for today. I know that we all hope that we are leaving everyone watching with plenty to reflect and offer some valuable solutions to consider during this pivotal time. I think now more than ever, the world has stood up and are reacting to the concerns expressed about the treatment of Black people in society. By us coming together, it ensures that the MIP Alumni Association can continue to give back to the game through education, leadership, and thoughtful conversation. Special thanks to all of the panel for your much valued contribution and for taking the time to join us. Keep your eyes peeled on our MIP social channels as we continue to gather more decision makers to join the conversation. Goodbye for now.